I'm very excited about our next speaker, partly because he's from Glasgow, and again, the more Celts we can get up here, the better. But also because about a few months ago, I was having dinner with someone in London, and we were talking about AI. And I'm not an AI guy, I'm a comms guy, but I understand that AI is important. And so this person that I was having dinner with said that he knew of a man called Richard Susskind, and that he'd written a book, and it was one of the best books he'd read on AI as someone who's not an AI person, and not to kind of downplay AI people will love this as well. But I bought the book, I read the book, I loved the book, and I then, as part of the planning for this, I said it'd be great if we could get Richard to come and speak. I mean, none of us know him, there's no connections, but let's just reach out to him and just see if he would be up for it. And he was, and I'm really thrilled. So before I introduce him, the book, How to Think About AI, A Guide for the Perplexed, is on sale actually over here in the corner, and Richard will be doing a signing during the coffee break. Just to kind of give you some of the people who have commended the book, it includes 2 former Prime Ministers, Gordon Brown and William Hague. Also fans of The Rest is Politics, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, and A.C. Grayling as well, have all commended the book. And not only that, but Gareth Russell, the Gareth Russell, who is on stage right now, has also commended the book. Not on the back of the book for some reason, but anyway. It's great to have Richard here. Richard is the world's most cited author on the future of legal services and leading expert on AI's impact on society. He's recently been appointed as a special envoy for justice and AI to the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. And he's a lawyer by trade. He also has a CBE, and there's a whole load of other things in this bio that I could tell you, but I'm going to not waste that time. I'm going to let him come and speak for himself. So just welcome Richard Susskind to the stage.
I think we may be having a problem with the mic. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that warm Glaswegian introduction. It's good to be here. I feel slightly nervous standing before you as someone who knows much less about faith than I suspect almost everyone in the room. And I'm going to, if there are any questions, resort to a technique that the great Albert Einstein used when he was giving a great lecture tour many years ago. He got very friendly with the chauffeur who used to drive him to and from the various places at which he was speaking. And one day, the chauffeur's driving along in the car, and he looks in the rearview mirror. Einstein's sitting in the back of the car, and he says, "Professor Einstein, you really are a remarkable man. What I find amazing is not simply the sophistication of your theories, and clearly they are very complex, but it's your ability to break these theories down into simple, straightforward propositions. That's what I admire so much. And in fact, so clear are you, and so many times have I heard you, that I think I myself could give one of your talks." So Einstein, sitting in the back of the car, he said, "Well, it's funny you should say this, because I'm getting rather bored of giving the same talk again and again. Why don't we try an experiment? Why don't we reverse roles? Just before we arrive at the lecture theater, I'll get out of my clothes and I'll climb into your chauffeur's uniform. We're about the same size. And in your chauffeur's uniform, I'll stand at the back of the hall as you would normally do, and you can get into my clothes and give the talk. What do you think?" Chauffeur thinks this is a great idea. They arrive at the lecture theater. Einstein climbs out of his clothes, gets into the chauffeur's uniform, stands at the back of the hall, as the chauffeur would normally have done, and the chauffeur in the front, in Einstein's clothes, gives this stellar lecture, and the crowds are going wild. But of course, what they hadn't banked on was question time. And this very eminent physicist stands up and asks this impossibly difficult question. The chauffeur's eyes glaze over, but then they light up. He said, "That question's so easy, I'm going to ask my chauffeur at the back of the hall to answer it." So, similarly, ladies and gentlemen, any difficult questions at any stage, I'll throw back to the chauffeurs amongst you. Let me start with a little story that I speak to everyone about. It's a story about Black & Decker, who manufacture power tools, and you all have heard of Black & Decker. Well, it's apparently the case that when they recruit new executives, they take them off on a course, sit them down in a room, and put up a slide of a gleaming power drill. And they say to the assembled new executives, this is what we sell, isn't it? And everyone agrees, of course that's what we sell, we're Black & Decker. Well, the trainers with some satisfaction point at the slide and say, that's not actually what we sell, because that's not really what our customers want. And with a flourish, they say, next slide, please. And they point to that and they say, this is what our customers actually want. And the next slide depicts a hole neatly drilled in a piece of wood. And they say, that's what our customers actually want. And it's your job to find ever more competitive, impressive ways of providing a hole in the wall, of giving our customers what they actually want. And I think the lesson for all of us in life there is that we often focus too much on how we go about doing what we do. And we're not open enough to the idea of working entirely differently. And to open one's eyes to that possibility, one needs to focus on the hole in the wall, the metaphorical hole. Ask the question, each of you in your respective roles, what's the fundamental value I bring to those I help? And in a digital AI-based society, might I be able to bring that value in new and better and different and more impactful ways? So I just want that thought to be roaming around your minds as I speak, and in fact, for as long as you care to remember it. My own story is that it is true, I'm a lawyer, but I'm half a lawyer, law professor, but I'm half an AI person too. I wrote my PhD at Oxford on AI and law from 1983 to 1986. So I've been thinking about AI for my entire life. And what I found over the last few years, and there's been some great advances in the technology, is that people are getting quite muddled in their thinking about AI, what it is, what it can do, what it can't do, what its impact might be. And that's why I wrote this book, How to Think About AI. The subtitle, it may interest you, it's A Guide for the Perplexed. I'm of the Jewish faith, and Maimonides, who's the greatest Jewish philosopher, wrote a book called The Guide for the Perplexed. This is not the guide, it's a guide for the perplexed. But what I wanted to somehow clarify is some of the basic ideas about AI, where it's taking us. And really, that's what I'm here for today. I'm not presuming to tell you how to apply it in your everyday lives. Safe to say, I want you to think of the hole in the wall rather than the power drill. But I do want you to track you through some thinking about what AI is all about. Let me start with a few examples. One is the best known one. On the 30th of September 2022, as I suspect all of you will know, a system called ChatGPT emerged. And this, for me, was the most remarkable single development I'd seen in 40 years. It surprised many computer scientists who had said that AI was going to be narrow for decades yet. And suddenly we had this general purpose system. We say it's an example of generative AI, because it produces text and images and music, and very importantly, it can also even write code, computer code. But this new generation of AI came as a shock to many of us. Suddenly, there was a system that could summarize a long, complex document, that could draft documents, that could create visualizations of documents, that could compare documents, that could answer questions, that could undertake research. Now, I agree, and I'm sure we've covered this, that these systems then and now are not free of error. But the very fact they do what they do, even to the level they do it today, is wholly remarkable. And this has been a major breakthrough. But one of my main messages for you today is that AI was not invented on 30th of November 2022. AI is an ongoing story, which I think dates back to about 1950. So we've been on the go for 75 years. Generative AI is the latest chapter. In fact, it's an early chapter. I believe we're still warming up. So we can and should be amazed by what we've seen so far, but we should be prepared for far more advanced uses of AI. Let me give you a couple of further examples. I write for the Times, mainly on the law page, and they asked me in early 2023, could you write an article, a column, 800 words, on the impact of AI on lawyers? So I thought I'd try an experiment. So I went to ChatGPT at the time, version 3.5, and I said, could you write a column about 800 words for the London Times about how AI will impact on lawyers? base it on Richard Suskind's work and write it in his style. And so I looked at the screen and what it had produced. And I think many of us was, yes, okay, but it's not nearly as good as the real thing. It was quite impressive, but I thought, I'm safe for some time yet. 6 months later, I gave the same prompt to GPT-4. So that's just half a version later. And I looked at the screen, and for the first time, a shiver stole up my spine, because I thought, actually, this is pretty much what I would produce as a first draft. And my thought then was, what happens when we're in a world of GPT-7? Will there be any need for the work that I do? Will the market show any loyalty to my way of writing a column? Or is my work as a writer, or at least a columnist, is that threatened and doomed? And what does that mean for lots of white-collar work? And just to take a step sideways for those of you who are interested, I wrote a book with my economist son, Daniel, published in 2015, called The Future of the Professions, where we looked at 8 different professions, this is a decade ago, and the impact of AI on these professions. And we looked at the clergy. That was one of the 8 professions we looked at. It makes quite strange and interesting reading now, but the same principles, I think, apply. So that was the Times, and another personal instance of how it might affect me. I also want to talk to you about brain-computer interface. There's lots of work going on devoted to how it is that we as humans can communicate with machines. There was an experiment with 29 patients who were suffering from epilepsy. And to each of the surface of their brains was attached electrodes to monitor the brain activity and capture it and analyze it as data. And there are thousands of electrodes in all. And they decided to try an experiment. They played the 29 patients the same piece of music independently. They captured all the brain activity as data. And then using an AI system, and this is published in a serious academic journal, using an AI system, that system reproduced what it essentially predicted these people were listening to. And you can listen to it on the web. It's spookily but recognizably the song by Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall. But I want you just to pause and think about this for a second. We already have technologies that can essentially identify what it is that a human is experiencing by capturing and analyzing their brain activity as data. Now remember, that system, as of so many other systems, that the current version is the worst it will ever be from now on. These systems are getting better and better, and people are working on wireless versions of these systems. I say to my privacy lawyer colleagues, if you think we've got problems with privacy today, you don't need to look very much further than these experiments in brain-computer interface. So there are 3 examples. ChatGPT, wholly remarkable, but still an early chapter in the story of AI. A story, an anecdote, a personal one about its impact on work, and finally just looking ahead to a very different world. But to understand how AI is unfolding, we also need to look at the broad trends in technology. And I'm sure I'm overlapping with, and hopefully dovetailing with what others have said. But let me just look at 3. The first is this idea of exponential, explosive growth in the underlying techniques. Most of us working in the technology field have known for many years that when you look at memory or hard disk capacity or bandwidth or processing power, we're not seeing a steady increase. We're seeing this explosive, almost hard to fathom growth in the capabilities of these systems. And the same is true in the world of AI. The dominant technique that underpins modern AI systems is known as neural networks. Now, I don't believe you need to understand in detail how neural networks work to understand the broad impact of these kinds of systems in AI. So I'm not going to talk about how they work, but just know that that's the dominant technique. The computing resource, sometimes called by computing people the compute, available to build these AI systems, these neural nets, is doubling every 6 months. That means over a 10-year period, we'll see 20 doublings. 2 to the power 20, that's a 1 million-fold increase in the computing resource available to build and train these systems we're talking about. So we can, and I'll say again, should be amazed by the current systems. But if you look ahead and think about and this is conservative, think of the resource we'll have available to build the next generations, again, this fortifies my view that we're just warming up. There is no finishing line. No one in China or South Korea or Silicon Valley is dusting their hands off and saying, job done, let's move on to something else, we've done AI. Quite the reverse. The pace of change seems to be accelerating. And this leads me to a notion that I find hard to explain, but nonetheless fundamental to think about, and I call this the not yet invented technologies. I believe by 2030, our lives will have been changed by technologies that have not yet been invented. Can I prove that? Of course not. Can I look at trajectories? Of course I can. I can look at 1950 and the few decades that followed that in the development of AI, and I can tell you that the major breakthroughs happened every 5 to 10 years. And you can look at over the last few years, and the breakthroughs are happening every 6 to 12 months. In my view, it's far more likely than not we'll see many more breakthroughs. And almost by definition, we don't know what these breakthroughs will do or what they will be like. But if you're in policy making or strategic planning, or indeed in any area of life, simply to assume that what we have today is somehow the end game doesn't seem to me to make sense. These are the not yet invented systems. So where's it all going to end? That's the question many of us ask, and we ask with a considerable degree, I think, of trepidation. So that's one of the questions I wanted to answer in the book. And I looked at the world of AI writing, and I spoke to people in the AI community. And the first thing to say to you is that AI experts do not speak with a single voice on where this is heading. In fact, there are 6 different hypotheses, as I've expressed them and laid them out, about the future of AI. So let me chat you through these briefly in each case. The first hypothesis is what I call the hype hypothesis, and it runs something like this. Yes, what we see just now is impressive, but it's actually only superficially impressive, because these systems, people like to use the term hallucinate, that's to say they make mistakes. These systems rely on data that is irredeemably flawed and biased. And so the hype hypothesis goes on. Within a couple of years, economically, we'll recognize that when we're using these systems, we can't rely on them without having humans in the loop, without having humans check. And therefore, it'll transpire that the cost of running, as it were, both systems will prove prohibitive. The bubble will burst. There'll be another, as they are known, AI winter. That's the hype hypothesis. It's held by quite a lot of academics, quite a lot of social scientists, and I simply lay it before you. The second hypothesis is what I call the Gen AI plus hypothesis. So generative AI, as discussed, ChatGPT, the best example, arguably. But the Gen AI plus hypothesis, people will say something like this. They'll say, yes, these systems of today do suffer from problems of bias, they do make mistakes, but when you look at the effort and the investment that's going into the AI industry, hundreds of billions of dollars every year, precisely to overcome these shortcomings, we have to expect, in one way or another, we'll conquer the defects, because the AI market depends on that. The Gen AI plus hypothesis goes a little bit further and says, however, but we won't go much further in AI. What we've seen today in the shape of Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT, whichever one you use and like, what we see today is about as far, and they'll work well, but that's about as far as AI will take us. That's the Gen AI plus hypothesis. The third hypothesis is the AGI hypothesis. AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence, and this is where it gets interesting. So the idea of AGI is that these systems will match human performance across the full range of cognitive tasks in which we engage. Basically, they'll be as capable as us. These AI systems, according to the AGI hypothesis, will match human performance across, as I say, this wide range of cognitive tasks. Now, this may sound to you like science fiction, but in work done in 2022, before ChatGPT was launched, leading AI developers, not across the whole community, people who are developing AI systems, were asked, how long do you think it will be before we have AGI? The common range of answers was 20 to 40 years, if ever. That same question if asked today yields the answer 5 to 10 years. And in private, so many leading AI people are saying 5 years. That's the AGI hypothesis. And if this is true, this hypothesis, it represents one of the most singular, one of the most significant developments, technological developments in the history of humanity. And I'm only halfway through. The fourth hypothesis is the superintelligence hypothesis. And to understand that, you need to go back to the mid-60s, when a man called John Irvin Good said something that's been echoed in various ways since then. He basically said that once these systems can match human-level performance, they may be the last invention that humans need make, because part of this capability will be to develop systems, and the systems themselves will be involved in developing more advanced systems, which in turn will develop yet more advanced systems. And what he called this as a intelligence explosion, I call it a capability explosion. Some people call it superintelligence. But the idea, and it's deeply disconcerting, is we end up with systems that are not just matching human performance, but are unfathomably more capable than us. That's the superintelligence hypothesis. The singularity hypothesis projects that humans and AI systems will somehow merge. Sometime deeply contentious. Some people call this transhumanism, where we'll have digital implants. We'll have bots roaming around our body. We'll have systems which can enhance our consciousness, widen our intellectual capabilities. This is the thesis, at least. That's the thesis of singularity hypothesis. And the final is the sixth hypothesis, which I call the AI evolution hypothesis. And this tends not to be advanced by people of faith. It tends to be advanced by cosmologists, physicists, who say something like this. On their secular view of society, and of humanity, and of the universe, they'll say the universe has been in existence for 13.8 billion years. Humanity's been around for a couple of 100,000 years. In cosmic terms, they will go on, and they'll say that humanity is just a blink in the eye. And they go further, and I accept this is deeply contentious, but I lay it before you as one of the hypotheses. They go on to say it may well be that the only contributions that humanity makes to the cosmos is to develop these far more capable systems that will in due course replace us. So I don't want to spoil your conference, but these are the six hypotheses. So the question is, which should we prefer? We've got this wide range of views from people who are, in one way or another, expert in the field. So a couple of things in helping us track our way through. The first thing to say is we have to distinguish between the adoption of AI and the advance of AI. So even if AI does develop to a certain level, that doesn't mean that humans will or should adopt the technology. And there are some quite mundane barriers to adoption, for example, regulation. Lots of things that humans do today that machines can't simply take on without there being vast legislative and regulatory change. Culturally, very few communities and societies are ready, for example, for systems that are unfathomably more capable than us. And I think crucially, we'll want to draw some moral red lines, some ethical boundaries. I think we'll want to say that even if machines can perform at this level, we don't want them to perform at that level. But I do think if we want to draw these lines, we want to start having that discussion sooner rather than later. A second thing, just in how we think about this advance of technology, is to avoid what I call not us thinking. When Dan and I did our book across 8 professions, we noticed, and it's quite funny in a way, but every professional tends to see far greater scope for AI in professions other than their own. We all do this special pleading. Interesting guy, Rich. He doesn't really know what we do. It doesn't really apply to us. Now, in a rational corner of all of our minds, we know this simply can't be right. But nonetheless, not us thinking pervades the common discourse on AI. And we've also got to avoid what I call technological myopia. And that is looking at the future potential of technology through the lens of today's limitations. So many people will take comfort from reports that come out about what computers, machines will never be able to do and the mistakes they make and so forth. I think to imagine that today's shortcomings are shortcomings forever is short-sighted. And so we cannot frame our future view of AI in terms of what these systems cannot do today. Now, my academic colleagues will say, all we can do is extrapolate in thinking about the future. And I'm not sure that's right. So I agree there's no evidence from the future, but I think we need to speculate as well as extrapolate. And we can do this in quite an informed way, because there's lots of drivers, it seems to me, that are pushing in a particular direction. So when I'm thinking through what is the future like, the kind of drivers I think about the trajectory of AI development. So I mentioned earlier, breakthroughs every 5 to 10 years in the early days, breakthroughs every 6 to 12 months now. I look at the increasing capability of systems, simply put. Hardly a day passes we don't hear news of some new system or app or breakthrough or technology, and often about technologies that are taking on tasks that hitherto we thought could only be undertaken by human beings. I look, as mentioned, at the underlying exponential growth in the underpinning technologies. I look at what a man called Ray Kurzweil calls the law of accelerating returns, hinted at earlier by me, but this is the idea that AI systems are already being used to develop the next generation of AI systems, and in a kind of slightly scary form of what mathematicians would call recursion, we're going to see systems that can self-improve, self-develop, and so forth. I look at the not yet invented technologies, at least the notion that we have to allow in our minds the idea of systems will be developed that we can't yet conceive. I look, again, as hinted, at the scale of investment, hundreds of billions, more than that, apparently, or in years to come in the field. I look at the evident market demand in business and government for these systems. I look at the remarkable startup community of some of the brightest people in the world precisely trying to overcome today's shortcomings and at the same time going for breakthroughs in crucial areas. And I look more generally at the number of very able humans who are working in the field, and I conclude that the hype hypothesis is entirely implausible. I know it's a hypothesis of comfort to many, but I find it entirely plausible. Now, I'm always wary about making predictions. I want to make one prediction and one recommendation. My prediction is that we will have what I call Gen AI Plus by 2030. That these systems today that we rightly use with caution in critical circumstances, I think by 2030, in a variety of ways and in ways that have not yet been invented, and I'm thinking of the trajectories, I think these systems we will regard by 2030 as pretty much reliable. And we do use a whole set of technologies today where we're not second guessing. When you look at your watch and you say, it's 10 to 3, you don't think, I think I'll go down to Greenwich just to check that's okay. It's right. That's not how we work. We, at some stage, accept these technologies as by and large reliable. And I think we'll be there by 2030 with the technologies we're all slightly tentatively using today. Here's something which is not a prediction, and it's in the book, but I say it really advisedly, the expressions I use. I say, I think we need to plan for AGI coming between 2030 and 2035. I'm not predicting it'll be there, but so significant a possibility is it that I think it would be a dereliction of our current generation's duties not at least to have plans in place to think the upside, how we might use it for good, and to think about the moral limits and how we might overcome the many vulnerabilities to which this technology would expose us. And that's why in my book, the fundamental question I ask is, what if AGI? And that's the question I want governments to ask, businesses to ask, parents to ask, and I want all people of faith to ask as well. What kind of world will we live in if we have AGI, and how do we prepare for it? Now, if AGI does not come about, I don't think that's time wasted, because in thinking about AGI, that'll really stretch our imagination and our boundaries in terms of, for example, the ethical limits and the regulatory constructs we need to put in place. So that's the question, the exam question for our generation. What if AGI? So I think AI will bring good. I think it'll bring bad. I think it will also bring weird. So let me just say the good. Some examples of things that matter to me. I think we'll use AI to crack the global health crisis. I think we'll use AI to crack the global access to justice crisis. I think we'll use AI greatly to enhance the education for all around the world. I think we'll use AI to help conquer the climate change crisis too. If these systems become as powerful as I and many others expect, I think many of our current dilemmas will be overcome using this technology. So that's the good news. I'm also concerned there's a mountain range of risks, and I look at them in detail and categorize them under 7 headings here. There are existential risks. I do worry about these systems being weaponized. There are remarkable socioeconomic risks. If, for example, these systems advance into the white-collar workplace as fast as many of us are anticipating, this will bring great social upheaval. And very few business bosses or government leaders are prepared to address that issue at this moment in time. There's another political issue of a sort, but it's economic too, that we are allowing, and perhaps there's nothing we can do, but we are allowing the most remarkable and unprecedented amount of capital and control and data and computing resource to be in the hands of a relatively small number of relatively unaccountable public corporations whose main objective is profit. We can't deny that. And if we, for example, find ourselves in a situation where there's much less work, meaningful work, or sufficiently well-paid work for most of us to do, and yet these systems greatly increase economic productivity in ways that are also anticipated, we have to contemplate a redistribution of wealth from the big tech world across our global community on a scale that we have simply not thought about in the past. And how we undertake that, to what extent it's desirable, to what extent it's possible, are questions of classical political thinking that I think are now being really stretched to their limits. We need new thinking altogether. So that's the bad news. The weird, and I'm just going to give you one example, which I find deeply disconcerting. We will, at some stage, have AI systems creating new virtual environments. So again, this idea that AI systems can write systems, AI systems will create virtual reality of various sorts. And we're already seeing that in gaming. And if you use these systems, they're already when you put on your headset, they're remarkably vivid. It's pretty clearly anticipated by many people, and I think this will be technologically possible, certainly for a particular generation, that for example, my children, when I pass away, my children will be able to go online into a virtual world, and based on all the data about me and all the videos of me, they'll be able to have a more or less realistic engagement with me when I died. I've talked to my kids about that, and none of them fancy the idea very much. You can take what you wish from that. But I don't actually know what to think about that. When I think of my own parents, there would be something deeply comforting, but there's also something deeply challenging about it. So I just don't know what I think about that, but I'll tell you what I do know. I don't want the decision on whether or not we do that to be the hands of Elon Musk or Sam Altman or Mark Zuckerberg. And what is fascinating and so deeply disturbing is that the main influencers in public policy, the main influencers in government just now, are not philosophers, theologians, sociologists. It's people in the tech world. It's tech entrepreneurs. It's technologists. Now, they are phenomenally talented people, but I'm not sure that the people who are either by training or disposition the best to be guiding us on the future of AI. What do I think this will mean for faith in ways that I think we could explore in another conversation? I think it will both weaken faith and deepen faith. Because I think, and it's the final chapter of my book, I'll call it the Great Schism, I think we're going to find a division in humanity between those for whom AI actually, and they will welcome this, will in some sense take precedence over us as humans. And there are those for whom our spirit, our soul, our morality, our essential humanity is of prime concern. And it's quite hard to see how we can reconcile these two very different views. I call it the Great Schism. I think it's going to be a theological and a technological debate of a sort we've never had. And again, we need to prepare ourselves from that. So I've been working in AI for essentially, when I was an undergraduate, 1981, I've been working in AI for 44 years. And I've always been optimistic about AI. I've always believed, as I say, that AI can solve some of our greatest challenges in humanity. But as I wrote this book and I thought more about the threats we face from AI, I came to realize that balancing the benefits and the burdens of AI is going to be a huge challenge for us. In fact, what I say to you, and in conclusion, is that I think saving humanity with and from AI is the defining challenge of our age. Thank you very much.